Aviation partner, Representative Jerry Costello, and our ranking member, Nick Ray Hall, in getting agreement with the Senate so we can finally send a bill to the President. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 658, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from West Virginia.
Madam Chair, our leading Democrat on the Aviation Subcommittee, Mr. Costello, has been in the trenches on the runways and in the towers of this legislation for many years. He's been with the takeoffs and the landings of so many extensions, and I'll yield him such time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the ranking member for yielding to me and for his kind remarks. Madam Chair, all of us agree that we need a long-term FAA Reauthorization Act. The FAA and the aviation community need stability and direction that a multi-year authorization bill will provide. However, it's not this bill. It is important for members to know that H.R. 658 is a different FAA reauthorization bill from the bipartisan legislation that my colleagues and I worked together on and that passed the House 3 times in the 110th and 111th Congresses. That legislation would have created jobs, improved aviation safety, and provided the FAA with the resources necessary to modernize airport and air traffic control infrastructure. While some aspects of H.R. 658 were in prior House-passed bills and reflect some of my priorities, however, there are many troubling omissions and newly added provisions in the bill that are unacceptable. I think we all agree that we must make every effort to be fiscally responsible and cut federal spending where it makes sense, given the size of the deficit. At the same time, we also have a responsibility to the American people to keep our aviation system safe and secure, make needed improvements to our infrastructure, strengthen the economy, create jobs, and remain competitive. However, I share the concerns of those in the industry that this legislation includes funding cuts that will affect safety and put the flying public at risk, devastate the FAA's next-generation air transportation system, air traffic control modernization efforts, and ignore the need to strengthen our economy by creating jobs. On the jobs issue, let me make it clear. Mr. Ray Hall said it, and I'll say it again. This bill does not create jobs. Instead, it cuts roughly $2 billion over the next 4 years in the FAA's Airport Improvement Program. The AIP provides funding to airports across the country for infrastructure projects such as runway and air traffic control towers, and these projects create well-paying construction jobs. A $2 billion decrease in funding in this bill means about 70,000 jobs. I will repeat that. 70,000 jobs will be lost because of the $2 billion cut in AIP funds. In fact, it leaves so little AIP discretionary funding available that even the most important projects, such as completing runway safety areas by the congressionally mandated deadline, cannot be funded. Second, my Republican colleagues argue that H.R. 658 directs the FAA to prioritize and protect safety-related activities within the bill's reduced funding levels. That sounds great, but all the evidence suggests that it can't be done. In February, the House Aviation Subcommittee held an FAA reauthorization hearing to listen to the aviation industry stakeholders. The unified message from the industry was loud and clear. Congress cannot roll back FAA funding to the 2008 levels without harming safety programs or hampering the industry. President Bush's former FAA administrator, Marion Blakey, stated, and I quote, "The prospect is really devastating to jobs and to our future if we really have to roll back to the 2008 levels and stop NextGen in its tracks," end of quote. A jobs bill? I don't think so, and neither does the person who ran the FAA under the Bush administration. The FAA is primarily a safety agency, and virtually all of its activities are safety-related. This Congress and the American people need to know that if we arbitrarily cut $1 billion a year out of the FAA budget, it absolutely will affect safety. The agency will not do more with less. It will be forced to do less with less, and cuts to these funding levels will have serious consequences. According to the FAA, the funding reductions in this bill will cause the agency to furlough the aviation safety workforce by hundreds of employees. Fewer safety inspectors, engineers, and support personnel will adversely impact air traffic services and aviation safety certifications and the implementation of NextGen, which will end up costing the taxpayers more in the long run and cause our aviation industry to be less competitive globally. In addition, a reduction in the workforce will likely mean the delay of important safety regulations, such as those mandated by Congress in the new aviation safety law that was enacted last year in a bipartisan vote in response to the Colgan Flight 3407 tragedy in Buffalo, New York. Further, this legislation will force important safety-related airport improvement projects to be delayed or abandoned, such as a wildlife hazard assessment. These types of assessments would help airports mitigate hazards like the one that brought down U.S. Airways 1549 in 2009, where Captain Sullenberger and First Officer Skiles were forced to land in the Hudson River because a flock of geese damaged the plane's engines. As Mr. Rahal has indicated, just last week, 2 planes landed safely at Washington National Airport without clearance because, reportedly, a single person in charge at the control tower apparently fell asleep. While investigations are ongoing, we have certainly seen accidents in the past where air traffic control staffing and fatigue were a factor, such as the August 2006 crash of Comair Flight 5191 in Lexington, Kentucky. I applaud Secretary LaHood's decision to reevaluate staffing needs throughout the country. Congress will also need to closely examine air traffic control staffing and fatigue going forward. But this incident should make it clear. Now is not the time to arbitrarily cut almost $4 billion from the FAA programs and argue that the agency can do more with less without compromising safety. Before us, and I know it's Mr. Rahal and others have talked about the provision in the legislation that I believe, too, is a poison pill. I will not go into all of the details as we will have an amendment later, but let me just say that the LaTourette-Costello amendment, I hope, will be supported by members of this body. It's a poison pill provision, Section 903 in this legislation, that is certain to hold the legislation up in the Senate. There is no way that I see the Senate acting on that provision, and the White House, of course, has already issued a statement saying that the President will receive recommendations from his advisors to veto the bill. If we are serious about passing a long-term FAA bill, this provision must come out. If it remains in the bill, it will be rejected by the Senate and the White House. Madam Chair, I will again say, and I've said many times before, I will work with my colleagues across the aisle to produce a fair bill that can not only pass the House but also pass the Senate and be signed into law by the President. H.R. 658 in its current form will not pass the Senate or be signed into law by the President and will require significant changes before it's enacted. Finally, Madam Speaker, let me Madam Chair, let me address a couple of comments that my friend, the chairman of the full committee, led off with in his remarks. He indicated that the Democrats, and we were in charge for all of these years, and we weren't able to pass legislation. We had to have 17 extensions. I would remind my friend that both in 2007, 2009, and in 2010, we passed bipartisan legislation to reauthorize the FAA. It was our friends in the Senate, in fairness, that held the legislation up. It took them 3 years to pass an FAA reauthorization bill. And in fact, as my friend from Florida will remember, that it was the 2 senators from Tennessee that held the bill up in the Senate. And it was 2 issues that were held up in the Senate, and those issues involved both PFCs and DCA, the number of slots at Washington Reagan National Airport. Madam Chair, I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 658, the FAA Reauthorization and Reform Act, and hope that after we reject this bill, we can go back and get a bill that accomplishes what we set out to do in the legislation, the bipartisan legislation that we passed last year. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Chair, can I inquire as to the amount of time remaining on each side?
Gentleman from Florida has 5.5 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from West Virginia has 4 minutes remaining.
Madam Chair, I would ask unanimous consent to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania of my time and allow him to control it for the purpose of a colloquy.
Without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania will control the time. 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Chairman, as you know, the EAS program was established to ensure that smaller communities across the country, including those in my congressional district, retain a link to the national air transportation system. I also understand that we have a severely constrained federal budget and that I agree with the Chairman that we must do more with less, and we need to ensure that federal programs actually make sense. As a member of the committee, I look forward to working with the Chairman to get this long overdue FAA bill to the President's desk for signature, and I look forward to working with the Chairman to make the needed changes to the EAS program.
No. Yield to.
Okay. I'd now like to yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson.
Is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Essential Air Service assists over 140 communities throughout the United States. You know what? EAS, Essential Air Service, works. Talk about 2 airports real quick. Williamsport, Pennsylvania was on EAS. It needed it to get their deployments up. And frankly, what's happened has been successful. It's now off of EAS. The program works. These folks are now operating without that. Du Bois, Pennsylvania, their deployments are growing at this point. And they're on the right track. EAS is serving the correct purpose of what it has. If EAS stops and ends, here's what ends in Du Bois, Pennsylvania. Private sector jobs totaling $9 million in payroll and $28.8 million in economic activity. I just do my best. I encourage the support of the Essential Air Service. I think it's very important for rural America.
Agree with the gentleman.
I agree with the gentleman, and I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Berg.
Gentleman from North Dakota is recognized for 30 seconds.
This bill will ensure the much-needed long-term stability and development of our nation's aviation infrastructure. However, I am incredibly concerned about the provision in this bill that would phase out Essential Air Service. EAS is critical to large states like my own. Rural regions rely on EAS for vital air transportation. In North Dakota, airports like Jamestown and Devils Lake would not be able to provide the critical air service without this support. I've spoken with Congressman Mica, Chairman Mica, and understand the need for the process to keep moving forward with this bill. This bill contains many good provisions that I should support. I also know how vital rural access to essential aviation is. So I'd ask the gentleman from Florida and Pennsylvania if they'd commit to working with me and other members to support the EAS program.
I thank the gentleman.
Time has expired.
I thank the gentleman from North Dakota and recognize the gentlelady from South Dakota, Ms. Noem.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Chair, we've spent the last 3 months debating the need to get spending under control. And it's a good thing. That's why my constituents sent me here. And that's what I plan to continue to do. But we also need to remember that we need to continue to look to get spending under control and help our economy and create jobs. A large part of that is providing certainty for American people. And like many of my colleagues, I represent the rural parts of America. Many of them are concerned with the uncertainty that removing this program, Essential Air Service, too quickly would bring. Many of the communities in rural America, including those in South Dakota that rely on this program, use it as an economic development tool. They understand that they won't be using EAS forever. But I'm concerned, Madam Chair, that we may not be providing them with the time that they need to plan according to under this bill. This issue deserves additional consideration. I hope that as we move forward with conversations with our Senate colleagues, that this is given much more careful consideration, and I look forward to working on it with them. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady from South Dakota, and we look forward to working with the chairman, gentlelady from South Dakota, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, North Dakota, as we move the bill forward.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania's time has expired. The gentleman from West Virginia.
Madam Speaker,
Ways and Means claim their time.
Oh, gentleman from Oregon.
would claim the time for Ways and Means.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman has 5 minutes.
Thank you. I yield such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I have appreciated the debate here on the floor, talking about the essential services that are included in the FAA reauthorization. but sadly some of the consequences for significant cuts in vital services. I hear from some of my friends talking about essential air service. It impacts my state. We're looking at significant reduction in airport construction, and as we've heard, it would stop NextGen, as the former administrator under the Bush administration was quoted as saying, in its tracks. But, Madam Speaker, it doesn't need to be this way. We can, in fact, respect the concerns about not adding to the deficit without shortchanging these essential programs. Our friends in the Senate, on one of those rare occasions, the other body has shown us the way. They have passed in the last year by 93 votes, last year an 87-8 vote already in this session, a provision, reauthorization that actually adds revenues, not general taxes, but there's been an agreement that has reached, overwhelming agreement. You don't get 87 votes out of the other body for raising revenue unless there's broad acceptance with the industry, with those who are regulated, and those who are concerned about preserving these essential services. There's an agreement within a broad swath of the industry to increase the fuel tax, a user fee for the people who benefit. Another critical area that the bill is silent, and in fact we haven't adjusted for 10 years, is the ceiling on the passenger facility charge. And this isn't even a tax that Congress imposes. It is simply an authorization for what local authorities can decide makes sense for their vital programs. Madam Chair, we don't have to choose between tens of thousands of job loss, putting the traveling public at risk, delaying essential efficiency improvements, and cuts to vital programs, or increasing the deficit. We can simply move forward with simple, common sense, broadly agreed upon proposals to adjust revenues, to have the flexibility to make the investment that's going to make a difference for years to come, and make the difficult job of the chair and the ranking member and the two subcommittees, makes that difficult job much easier. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Chairman, I'm pleased to yield to the very distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, and also the chair of the Highways Subcommittee of Transportation Infrastructure. For 3 minutes, the balance of our time, Mr. Duncan.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Florida for yielding me this time. And I rise in support of this bill and commend Chairman Micah and Chairman Petri, because as a former chair of the Aviation Subcommittee, I know how difficult it is to bring all the competing interests together and produce a bill such as this. However, I would like to raise one issue that I still have some concerns about. It's been brought to my attention by a former outstanding member of this body, Jim Coyne, a former congressman from Pennsylvania and who has been the longtime head of the National Air Transportation Association, that some airports are engaging in activities that compete with privately owned fixed-base operators. I did not file an amendment because the chairman has graciously agreed to hold a formal roundtable discussion about this matter and begin working to make sure that this does not become commonplace. I hope that this is not a trend that will continue, because privately owned businesses should not have to compete with government or quasi-governmental agencies such as airport authorities, which do not pay taxes and are not subject to all the rules and regulations that private businesses are. Each time there's been a White House conference on small business, and they've held one on average every 5 years since 1955, either the #1 concern or one of the top 3 concerns at all these White House conferences on small business has been freedom from government competition. Madam Speaker, since the Eisenhower administration in 1955, it has been U.S. policy, or supposed to have been, that government, quote, should not
start or carry on any commercial activity to provide a service or product for its own use if such a product or service can be procured from private enterprise through ordinary business channels. And so that is my concern, and we're going to continue working on that. I also want to mention an amendment that will be filed later by Mr. Schuster on behalf of myself and Mr. Meehan, my colleagues from Pennsylvania, a very common sense amendment. This amendment that we will be filing does two very simple things. It states that the FAA should not use a one-size-fits-all approach when considering new regulations. It also requires the FAA to take into consideration the cost it is imposing on the private sector when issuing new regulations. This amendment simply codifies some or much of an executive order issued by President Obama on January 18th of this year. Quoting from the President's executive order, the President said, "Our regulatory system, quote, must be based on the best available science. It must allow for public participation and an open exchange of ideas. It must promote predictability and reduce uncertainty. It must identify and use the best, most innovative, and least burdensome tools for achieving regulatory ends, and it must take into account benefits and costs, both quantitative and qualitative." In addition, FAA Administrator Randy Babbitt has stated that a one-size-fits-all approach to rulemaking can make aviation less safe. There are different segments of the aviation industry that face very different challenges. I believe that by tailoring regulations toward these different segments of the industry, we can make aviation safer by helping address the different challenges that different types of businesses face. Finally, I would like to say that I agree with the Chairman about overstaffing in regard to our aviation regulation. I am amazed, Madam Speaker, at how many members and private citizens have expressed concerns about TSA overstaffing and have mentioned the line of thousands standing around. The number of screeners has gone up, as I understand it, from 16,000 prior to 9/11 to 61,000 now, and that is simply far, far too many, and that needs to be looked into, and I know the Chairman intends to do that. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. Thank you.
Okay. Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Oregon.
May I inquire as to the amount of time remaining for Ways and Means?
Gentleman from Oregon has 2 minutes remaining.
Madam Chair, I would ask unanimous consent that these 2 minutes be assigned to the gentleman from West Virginia.
Without objection, the gentleman from West Virginia will control the time.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gentleman from West Virginia.
Madam Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, the lead Democrat on our Transportation Subcommittee.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Unfortunately, this legislation, under the guise of being fiscally prudent, is going to delay vital safety and capacity needs and enhancements to our aviation system, condemning future air travelers to even more congestion, more delays, more wasted fuel. It's going to cut an already inadequate inspection force, again threatening safety. And then there are other provisions that are problematic. A gentleman from Arizona may ask for a vote on an amendment to change the very fair and competitive slot language for national airport in the bill into an unfair, earmarked, anti-competitive amendment that would give potentially 70% of long-distance flights out of national airport to 2 airlines, about 50% to 1 airline, and he calls it competition. Now, I don't know what planet he's from, but that's not competition where I come from on an underserved West Coast market that has very few opportunities for my people to access a national airport. And then finally, a labor provision that was thrown in rather gratuitously that says that anyone who chooses not to vote in an election will be counted as a no. Now, the interesting thing is, if we had that same standard for elections to the United States House of Representatives, not one single member now sitting would have won their election, because it's not just the people who are registered to vote, it's anybody who's eligible to vote, and if they don't vote or don't register to vote, they count as a no. That would mean there would be no, I mean, some people might be happy there'd be no House of Representatives, but at least the sitting members would not be here. They want to apply that standard to representation for labor unions. That's incredibly unfair, short-sighted, and overrule the National Labor Relations Board. Finally, essential air service. We are supposed to have a system of universal air transport. It is critical to many small and developing communities, rural communities like I represent, to have a continuation of essential air service.
Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Chairman, I understand that the Ways and Means Committee is in markup, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent to claim their time. I believe that's 5 minutes on our side, and ask unanimous consent again that the Transportation Infrastructure majority claim that time.
Without objection, the gentleman from Florida will claim the 5 minutes from the Ways and Means Committee.
Thank you. And Madam Chairman, to yield to a distinguished gentleman, one of the senior members of the T&I Committee and leader on the Judiciary Committee, gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Coble, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the chairman for yielding. I rise in support of this bill, which is financially sound with no tax or fee increases. Simply put, the measure is long overdue, and the aviation sector needs certainty. We need to finish the task at hand. The manager's amendment considered later today includes language that will provide clarity for musicians who travel with small instruments. Now, I'm not talking, Madam Speaker, about stand-up basses or harps. Current policy varies from airline to airline as to what instruments are permitted on board. The amendment strikes a delicate balance to ensure that musicians can attain certainty and safety is assured. I'm appreciative to Mr. Miker, to Mr. Rahal, and to all staffs who worked with me on this provision, and thank them for its inclusion. I also support an amendment offered by Mr. Schuster that will help FAA regulations conform to reasonableness and reality. This amendment requires the FAA to recognize distinctions between sectors of the aviation industry and tailor regulations to each sector's facts. It also conforms FAA rulemaking to a number of good government principles, such as cost-benefit analysis, use of the best available information, and consideration of regulatory impacts on the economy. I again thank the distinguished gentleman from Florida for having yielded to me. I would like to insert, Madam Speaker, without objection, the remainder of my statement into the record, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection, the gentleman yields back. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Madam Chair, I yield 2 minutes to a distinguished member of our Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This bill would drastically cut funding for FAA programs, threatening the development of the next-gen air traffic control system and requiring the furlough of hundreds of safety-related employees. The bill also would change the National Mediation Board's election rules. Airline and railroad workers would no longer vote for union representation by a majority of those voting, but by a majority of all those eligible to vote. It would be extremely undemocratic to thus count votes not cast as no votes. No election in any free country does so, and I urge my colleagues to support the Laturet-Costello amendment to strike this provision. I also oppose provisions of the manager's amendment providing liability immunity for the airlines and limitations on discovery. Section 336 would block access to safety-related data through discovery and would block use of such information in court. It is virtually unheard of for Congress to simply declare that broad categories of information cannot be obtained by a party to a lawsuit or even used as evidence in a legal proceeding. Section 337 provides immunity to airlines and their agents for any type of damage resulting from an event contemplated by a safety management system. These systems are designed to analyze virtually every kind of risk, so granting this immunity would make it virtually impossible to hold an airline or individual accountable for negligence causing almost any accident. This liability shield would deprive injured victims of their rights and would also preempt state tort law. I find it hard to believe that anybody thinks that airlines should be allowed to act with negligence and be free from liability should you or me or any other American be injured or maimed or killed as a result of the negligence. For all these reasons, I must oppose the bill. However, I do want to thank Chairman Mica and Congressman Coble for including language in the manager's amendment to strengthen the provisions guaranteeing the right to carry or check musical instruments onto an airline. This is an issue I've worked on for many years, and I'm very pleased to see it finally moving forward. I hope that we can continue to find areas of agreement since passage of a long-term FAA authorization bill is long overdue. I look forward to working with my colleagues in that spirit, but until the funding levels are increased, the safety and worker provisions are in place, the poison pill provisions about union votes are removed, I cannot support this bill. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back, and his time has expired. Gentleman.
Might I inquire as to how much time remains?
Gentleman from Florida has 3.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from West Virginia has 2 minutes remaining.
I would like to reserve my time that I acquired on behalf of the Ways and Means Committee to close, and I believe if it's appropriate to have the Science Committee, which I think has yielded 5 minutes on each side, go forward prior to my close.
Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized for up to 5 minutes.
I rise in strong support of H.R. 658, legislation reauthorizing the Federal Aviation Administration through fiscal year 2014. Title 10 of H.R. 658 reauthorizes the agency's research and development programs. It was drafted by the Commerce on, I believe, Science, Space, and Technology as H.R. 970, the Federal Aviation Research and Development Reauthorization Act of 2011. On March 17th, the committee met, amended, and approved H.R. 970. The rule accompanying H.R. 658 fully incorporates the language from our amended bill into Title 10, which we support. With regard to the funding, Title 10 adheres to the same principles of the larger bill, providing authorization levels for the research, engineering, and development account of the fiscal year 2008 level for the fiscal years 2012 through 2014. For fiscal year 2011, the authorization is a hybrid of current spending under the continuing resolution and the FY 2008 level. Further, our bill authorizes spending for research and development activities that are funded through the agency's facilities and equipment and airports account. None of our members relish cutting R&D funding, but members on our side of the aisle were passionate in their belief, as I am, that we must reduce federal spending, and the FAA, like every other federal agency, must bear some burden and some measure of burden. Research and development plays a critical role at FAA, providing the agency with the tools and technology it needs to carry out on a diverse set of missions. The largest R&D program currently underway supports development of a whole host of technologies required to ensure successful deployment of the next generation air transportation system. R&D also is fundamental to FAA's role in the safety of air travel, giving the agency the insight and data required to develop tools and policies guiding the introduction, use, and the maintenance of new materials and systems incorporated in the modern jet aircraft. These technologies are necessary if we're to continue improving the national airspace system safety, efficiency, and security, especially considering the critical role now played by aviation in our nation's economy and public safety. In addition, Title 10 directs FAA to undertake research in a number of areas, including the safe operation of unmanned aircraft systems in the national airspace, research on runways and engineered material restraining systems, research on developing unleaded fuel for the use in general aviation piston engine aircraft, and on the development and certification of jet fuel from alternative sources, and research on the effects of aviation on the environment. There are many other activities too numerous to mention here, but I did want to provide examples to members of the broad sweep of FAA-sponsored R&D. Finally, I understand that Chairman Michael's amendment offered to the bill seeks to modify certain provisions while also adding a few. A specific provision amends existing law found in Title 51 of the United States Code regarding the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. I support the goal of this language with the understanding that the inclusion of this language does not alter the jurisdiction of my committee on this issue, and that the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee will work with us to ensure this provision or similar provisions are preserved. They're preserved as we continue to move through the legislative process on H.R. 658, including any negotiations or conference with the other body. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to urge all members to support this bill. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from Maryland.
Madam Chair, I rise to claim control of the minority time allotted to the Science, Space, and Technology Committee for this bill.
The gentlewoman is recognized for up to 5 minutes.
And I yield such time as I might consume. The need for a long-term Federal Aviation Administration FAA Reauthorization Act is clear. But H.R. 658 reauthorizes the FAA for 4 years, and the arbitrary spending cuts that our Republican colleagues have imposed on the agency in H.R. 658 will devastate FAA's ability to improve flying safety and to modernize the nation's air traffic control system. For this reason, unfortunately, I cannot support the bill. H.R. 658 proposes a 23%, an unbelievable 23% cut to FAA's research, engineering, and development accounts from the funding levels enacted by Congress for fiscal year 2010. These cuts are not related in any way to a lack of need for the research. In fact, the committee in multiple hearings acknowledged the need for the research. The Congress had heard expert testimony from witnesses who've stressed the importance of investing in both research and development and in the Next-Gen Modernization Initiative, and have warned of the negative impact that cuts will have on the nation's air traffic control system and the flying public. To cut FAA's R&D efforts so drastically while we're trying to recover from a recession and while oil prices every day climb higher risks stifling this industry and the millions of jobs it supports. But I also want to be clear that the research and development work that is done at FAA helps to protect the safety of all the flying public. These cuts to aviation safety-related research have a high probability of reducing the safety of our air transportation system. These effects may not be felt today or tomorrow, but they will be felt, and they will have serious consequences for the flying public. Mr. Chair, Democratic members of the committee attempted to prevent the cuts to 3 key safety research initiatives at our committee's markup of H.R. 970. These amendments, if adopted, would have increased the 4-year authorization amount by a total of $16 million, or less than 3% of the $600 million authorization in the bill, a small amount for such a huge payoff. And as we noted in the committee markup, these costs really pale in comparison to even a single major aircraft accident, both in terms of money and the horrible loss of life. Unfortunately, our Republican colleagues voted to reject the loss of life. Unfortunately, our Republican colleagues voted to reject each of these key safety amendments and research amendments that go to safety. And the choice couldn't be more clear. Our colleagues chose to make the flying public less safe in order to meet an arbitrary, very arbitrary goal for cutting federal spending. I share our colleagues' concern about the nation's deficit, but we reject any notion that addressing the nation's deficit requires us to make our nation's transportation system less safe. As we move forward in the negotiations with the Senate over a final FAA reauthorization, I remain committed to ensuring the safety of our nation's air transportation system and hope that our Republican colleagues will join in this effort. In conclusion, I'd like to speak to a measure in the provision of the underlying bill that has me greatly troubled, and that has to do with union elections. It is staggering to me that we've decided that we're going to count no votes or not voting as a no vote. I just took a look at the winning numbers for our leadership. Our Speaker was elected in 2010 with 142,700 votes. His opponents and those who weren't registered totaled 482,170 votes. If we had used this same theory, this same strategy for our own elections and for the election of Speaker Boehner, he would have lost that election by 339,000 votes. And that goes for each of us. And perhaps the public wants that. Maybe we should all be counting non-voting as no votes, and then we could completely change this House of Representatives. But that's not the way we run elections, and that's not the way that we should run union elections. And so it's unfortunate that the majority has decided to put this poison pill into the underlying legislation that makes it unsupportable on this side of the aisle. And with that, I would ask unanimous consent to yield the balance of our time to the ranking member on Transportation and Infrastructure, Mr. Rahal.
Without objection, so ordered.
And how much time remains?
There is 30 seconds remaining for the gentlelady from Maryland. Gentleman from Texas.
Chairman, I yield the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Palazzo, as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to join with Mr. Hall, Chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, to urge all members to support passage of H.R. 658, the FAA Reauthorization and Reform Act of 2011. This is a good and balanced bill that will help advance important modernization and safety programs at the FAA, and to do so in a fiscally responsible manner. The Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee, which I chair, held an oversight hearing on February 16th that focused on FAA's research and development activities. Witnesses from FAA, industry, and external advisory panel to FAA and the DOT Inspector General spoke in general agreement about the importance of FAA's research and development portfolio, with the non-agency witnesses also offering constructive suggestions for improvement. Of chief importance to the agency and industry is development and implementation of the Next Generation Air Transportation System program. NextGen will modernize our nation's air traffic control system, increasing its capacity, safety, security, and efficiency. But this ambitious program will not succeed without a well-structured, well-managed research and development program that will deliver appropriate technologies when and where they're required. To offer a few examples, currently there's NextGen related research focused on increasing our weather prediction capability, research to better understand human factors in a highly automated environment, wake turbulence prediction, and research on aircraft technologies. What we're asking FAA to do is to prioritize and make choices. Most folks in Washington at home acknowledge that we cannot afford business as usual, and by routinely increasing federal spending year after year. This bill is a responsible approach to pushing the FAA forward, but doing so wisely. Thank you.
All time has expired for the Committee on Science and Technology. Gentleman from West Virginia.
How much time do I have?
Gentleman from West Virginia has 2.5 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Florida has 3.5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Texas.
Gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Let me applaud the work of this committee, and particularly Mr. Rahal and Mr. Costello, who we work very closely with. I serve as a ranking member on the Transportation Security Committee, and I can't imagine a more perfect fit than the question of safety and security for our traveling public. I thank the chairman of the full committee and others associated with this legislation. However disappointed I am in having to come to the floor and raise questions about our next steps, and I am particularly devastated about the cuts in the FAA's next generation air traffic system, the next gen. Whenever you think of air traffic controllers, I want you to think of them as first responders, which I will discuss in an amendment that I have regarding the issue of ensuring the kind of staffing needs necessary to engage in security. But further, since I have one of the largest airports in the country, Bush Intercontinental Airport, which we are proud to name, I'm disappointed that the FAA Airport Improvement Program has been cut, and therefore construction, improving runways, taxiways, terminals. There's one thing about lifting up and getting in the air and having that beautiful feeling, but what about coming down and not being able to work? May I have an additional 20 seconds or?
15 seconds. I yield an additional 15 seconds.
15 seconds.
And quickly, let me say I'm disappointed that we would have a Schuster amendment that would really put a dent in the pilot fatigue rulemaking. That is very important. And then, of course, the issue dealing with the Costello-La Tourette amendment, which I support. How can you win by 70,000, then you count the people who didn't vote, and you lose by 150,000? Let's be fair. Let's have a bill that responds to the needs of all. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Florida.
I'd like to yield 15 seconds for the purpose of a unanimous consent request to Chairman Hall from Texas.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter a statement in support of Mr. Nagelbauer's amendment into the record. I understand it will be considered shortly, and I fully support it. Yield
Without
back.
objection, so ordered. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to close if the other side is ready. Okay. I really appreciate the sincere efforts of the chairman of my committee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, and the subcommittee chairman, Mr. Petri, and our ranking Democrat on the subcommittee, Mr. Costello. There have been serious efforts to work in a bipartisan way, but I fully realize that on the majority side, a lot of these decisions, a lot of these funding levels are not necessarily made by the chairman of the full committee and the chairman of the subcommittee, but rather by other forces that are out there on the majority side. I also recognize that a lot of these decisions are made at levels higher than the chairman's, at levels higher than even that at which airplanes fly. And so this is not all necessarily the chairman's fault. I think it would be fair to warn the body that the administration has issued their position on this legislation, and they say that if funding were appropriated at the levels proposed in the bill, the safe and efficient movement of air traffic and air on the ground and in the air would be degraded today and in the future. And more importantly, the administration has reiterated its opposition to the poison pill labor provisions in this bill, and has said if the President is presented with a bill that would not safeguard the ability of railroad and airline workers to decide whether or not they would be represented by a union based upon a majority of the ballots cast in an election, or that would degrade safe and efficient air travel, his senior advisors would recommend that he veto the bill. Mr. Chairman, I urge that the House do not accept this bill. We have even further degrading amendments to safety that will come later in the amendment process that I want to reference very quickly at this point, including the one that will allow more flyovers at sports events.
Second. Gentleman's recognized.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this would go against a ban instituted after 9/11 that prohibited flyovers at sports events for safety reasons. So that comes later on in the amendment process, and I think it just shows the threats that we are posing to our safety of the air traveling public if this bill were to pass as it is. I urge its opposition.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Florida.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as we close debate on the long overdue FAA reauthorization, first I have to thank my co-partner in this, the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Rahal. He is a gentleman. It's great to work with him. I have to thank also Mr. Petri, the chair of the Aviation Subcommittee. He and Mr. Costello, two gentlemen, have worked hard to bring the bill to this point. It's been a struggle for 4 years and now to get here, but I'm pleased that we're at this point. There are differences of opinion about the bill. I have to take a moment and thank staff on both sides. They're great and have been working together to get us to this point. And we'll debate the amendments and the differences, and then we'll hopefully pass this and get people working and get our aviation policy secure for the nation. I have to thank Mr. Rahal, the chairman of the Science and Technology Committee, for his provisions to make certain that research in aviation is done. Mr. Camp brought a proposal here from Ways and Means. It doesn't raise taxes. It doesn't increase fees. There's no passenger facility increases. So those kinds of things, we brought a bill. It does have $59 billion over 4 years. This isn't small potatoes, and it can, if properly expended and wisely applied, can do well for the nation, ensuring safety and programs that are so important, and moving jobs that are so critical. 9.3% of our economy depends on this legislation. The colloquy between Mr. Schuster, the gentlelady from South Dakota, Ms. Noem, the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Berg, Mr. Thompson from Pennsylvania on essential air service. I understand their concerns and their great advocacy for their constituents and making certain that service is there. We do have a sunset provision. We'll work with them, and we'll do our best, but I agreed to work with them, and I reconfirm that here. Finally, letters of support. You heard the other side say that nobody supports this. Have a list of 45 major agencies ask unanimous consent, not just, associations, everyone, major organization, aviation industry, ask unanimous consent that that be submitted to the record. Then a question about AIA support, letter of support from Marion Blakey, their support of this legislation.
The gentleman's request will be covered under general leave.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So in conclusion, you know, we're doing here something that needs to be done. This is very important. It's been left aside, 17 extensions, when the other side, of course, had huge majorities, could have done this almost by unanimous consent with the President, too. Now, the President's threatened to veto this. Now, you know, I'm not going to say make my day, but I wanted to say that this is a fair provision, fair to everyone, and labor, fair to everyone who wants to join a labor union, to keep 70 years of law that's been on the book and not change it because you jerry-rigged the membership of the National Mediation Board. So let's be fair, fair going in, fair coming out. And this provision that we have in the bill creates fairness. Pleased to yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman of Florida has expired. All time for general debate is expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule, the amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print dated March 22, 2011. The amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in House Report 112-46. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider amendment number 1 printed in House Report 1112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I have a manager's amendment.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Micah of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Well, the manager's amendment is pretty simple. First of all, we've tried to accommodate as many members as we could with their requests and include on both sides of the aisle provisions that they requested that weren't in the original submission. Additionally, the manager's amendment makes technical corrections to provisions in the underlying bill, including those related to unmanned aircraft system, ADSB readiness verification, flight attendant fatigue, FAA access to criminal records database, and also, as Mr. Coble, who was with us earlier, just a small accommodation for another member who wanted musical instruments, some provisions, again, in the bill. So we've tried to accommodate many of the members who've had these requests. The manager's amendment also contains provisions regarding public-private partnerships to advance next gen. If the government does it, it usually doesn't get done. If we have public-private partnerships and closely monitor that, we can have great successes, reduce costs, and bring technology online that makes it even safer for people to fly at lower cost than with less personnel. We have protections for voluntary safety data submissions. We also have a provision that's very important for European Union emissions trading scheme. This is very important because they are trying to close us down or tax us as we enter some of their airspace. We've had agreements at the airport for new revenue liability protections for volunteer pilot organizations, for public benefit flights, and also for privacy protections for airspace users, and also finally the safe shipment of lithium batteries. So with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from West Virginia seek time and
yes, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I rise in opposition to the manager's amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, our distinguished chairman, Mr. Micah, for two key concerns. First is that the amendment would basically create a liability shield for airlines and airports that are negligent and cause airplane crashes. Last year, Congress directed the FAA to require airlines to implement safety management systems. Using these systems, airlines will use data to identify risks and improve safety. The FAA is likely to require airports to adopt similar systems. Under this amendment, adoption of a safety management system would give airlines and airports a total pass on liability for their ordinary negligence. It would deprive passengers and their families of the right to seek compensation for damage caused by airline crashes. The right to go to court and seek compensation for damage caused by the negligence of another person, including an airline or airport, is an intrinsic part of our law. This amendment would take that right away, and I cannot support it. My last concern is about a provision in the amendment dealing with lithium batteries. The transport of lithium batteries without appropriate safety checks has been proven to present hazards that could bring down an airplane. This amendment would lock the United States into following international standards on transporting lithium batteries that set the floor, not the bar that we should aspire to. It would prevent airlines from conducting acceptance checks of battery shipments, and it would derail essential rulemakings by the Department of Transportation to ensure that lithium batteries are transported safely. For these two reasons, Mr. Chairman, I cannot support the amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves his time. The gentleman from Florida.
I reserve my time to close on my amendment.
Gentleman from West Virginia.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman has 3 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Florida also has 3 minutes remaining.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Maryland.
Gentlelady is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in opposition to the manager's amendment. This amendment would extend the moratorium on safety regulations for human spaceflight launches for 8 years after the first licensed human spaceflight launch. With these type of flights likely not to begin until 2013, we're talking about delaying safety regulations for a decade or more. Let me first say that I hope that commercial spaceflight, both manned and unmanned, eventually will become a robust sector of our economy. We're not quite there yet. But certainly some of these companies in this emerging industry openly talk about flying a business model of flying, allowing hundreds of paying passengers to space every year. These are ambitious goals, and I wish them well. I hope I'm one of them. But if these companies are successful and start carrying paying passengers like me, then what we're talking about with this amendment is allowing an entire human transportation system to operate for almost a decade without any meaningful safety regulation. I find that to be unconscionable. I would point out that by rejecting the amendment, Congress is not dictating that any safety regulations have to be promulgated. On the contrary, under current law, an absolute prohibition exists until 2012, the end of 2012. Even after that point, the agency would not be required to move forward with a rulemaking process, but would only do so if it saw a need. But imposing an arbitrary prohibition on safety regulations for the remainder of the decade, if not longer, really abdicates our responsibility to the public. If there's a fatal accident later in this decade, if we're carrying astronauts and there's an accident in the decade, I don't want it to be said that Congress blocked the establishment of safety regulations that could have prevented that accident, and I don't think many members in this body would either. I'd note that it's my understanding that the Science, Space and Technology Committee is planning on holding hearings this session on this very topic with an eye towards moving a bill to address these issues sometime in this Congress. And so we're really premature here to set in place a moratorium that we haven't even had a chance to hear debate on and hear from the industry or the FAA or safety experts on the subject. I hope this isn't the kind of rush to judgment that we'll come to expect on issues of public safety. I have some familiarity with these issues on science, space, and technology. Now, the commercial space folks argue that spacecraft designs and operational concepts are not quite mature enough, and there's been no operational experience on which to base safety regulations. Fair enough, that may be true. But these same people are also arguing that the industry is mature enough for the government to turn over NASA's transport of astronauts to space to them. You cannot have it both ways, and these notions are mutually exclusive. If the industry is mature enough to take on tasks currently performed by the government, then the industry is mature enough to begin thinking about a safety regime to ensure the American public is protected in these activities. Mr. Chair, I want to note that once again there's no reason to rush to judgment on these issues, and with that I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Florida.
Is there any remaining time on the other side, or may I close?
The time in opposition to the amendment has expired.
Well, thank you. Then to close on the manager's amendment, which I have offered today, first of all, let me just say that the two objections that have been raised, again, by the minority, and I appreciate their concerns, the safety reporting, which we put in some years ago, has actually resulted in probably the safest system that we've had in the world and the safest safety record in history. If you stop and think about it, I chaired the aviation subcommittee. The last large commercial aircraft that we had that went down, unfortunately, was near Veterans Day of 2001 after 9/11. Safety reporting is so important, and it's done on a voluntary basis, and it's so important that the people who collect this data are not held liable. They're collecting the data that benefits us to make this safe. This has worked. It's kept us safe, and we want to ensure, again, that this continues. And someone will say, well, we had commuter. Yes, we did have commuter, and we also passed commuter safety legislation to deal with problems we have there. So we have a safe system. We don't want to stop that. We don't want the recording of the data to stop, or those held liable that are collecting the data. So that's the first point. The second point, lithium batteries. This is a lithium battery. This has a lithium battery. This is a pacemaker. This keeps your heart going. This has a lithium battery. Laptops have lithium batteries. Almost everything have lithium batteries. And, of course, leave it to the DOT to try to put in place rules that would create stopping, you know, Granny, Grandpa, and others that need this pacemaker from getting it. If we didn't have this provision in here, it'd be a $1.1 billion impact on industry. We'd reroute the shipment of this stuff through other countries to avoid paying and going through the onerous regulations that our government would create. Countless consumers would be forced to pay more because of silly regulations that don't make any sense. A severe supply chain would be and limitations on supply would be imposed. And we'd have delays in shipping life-saving equipment. This little thing here that saves hearts, that's what they want to mess up. One more federal regulation to delay shipping. Even our troops, which rely on these lithium batteries, their receiving them would be put at risk the way DOT is doing. This is a good provision. It needs to be in the bill, and we've got to keep some of the regulation that put us out of business, put jobs overseas, and put people at risk out of our way. So I dramatically urge the House to pass the manager's amendment with these sound provisions that will make a big difference, and again ask for consideration of the manager's amendment.
Gentlemen.